billionaire owner of one of the most luxurious brands in the country. He walked into his own store dressed like an ordinary man. No one recognized him, and what happened there would change his life forever. Subscribe now, or this might be our last meeting. Follow, comment, and share to stay connected. New York has two souls, one of glass and one of flesh. The glass soul lives in the windows along Fifth Avenue, polished, immaculate, cold. The flesh soul moves beneath wool coats and hurried footsteps and unspoken dreams. It is made of courage, of grind, and, sometimes, of a kindness long forgotten. On a gray spring morning, the rain had just let up. Steam lifted from the subway grates like the city exhaling. Puddles mirrored traffic lights and rippling squares of red and green, and the smell of coffee braided into the sharper scent of new leather drifting out from storefronts. A man walked slowly down the street of the wealthy. His name was Michael Ferris, a little over 40, wearing a plain navy jacket, worn-out shoes, and a canvas backpack slung over one shoulder. He walked the way someone walks when he is not in a rush, but knows exactly where he's going. No one recognized him. No one could have guessed that this man was the CEO of Luna House, one of the most respected fashion houses in America. That morning, Michael had decided to see his world with new eyes. No titles, no assistants, no town car. Just himself, an ordinary man standing in front of the truth. He paused at the corner, next to a flower cart overloaded with tulips and peonies. The vendor called, "2 for 10, brighten your day," he said, lifting a bundle like a small sunrise. Michael smiled, but kept walking. He passed a doorman hosing down the sidewalk, a pair of tourists arguing over the best bagel place, and a young violinist coaxing Vivaldi into the damp air. A city made of tiny ceremonies, he thought, and each ceremony a chance to be kind or cruel. The Luna House flagship rose from the corner like a modern temple of luxury floor-to-ceiling glass, pale travertine floors, and long brass rails that caught the light like rings. Inside, everything gleamed: gold-lit fixtures, hushed voices, a fragrance that hovered between vanilla and power. Tailored suits stood sentry beside dresses that seemed to float. The music was a whisper, piano notes barely there. Behind the counter stood Valerie Reed, sales director, elegant, precise, with a gaze that could weigh a person in 1 second flat. Her lipstick matched her polish, and her spine held a posture honed by quotas and compliments. At her side worked Claire Morris, a young associate with kind eyes and hard-working hands. She folded a camel hair coat with the tenderness one might reserve for a cherished memory, pressing the seam as if blessing it. "Remember, no dust on those mirrors," Valerie said, not looking up from a tablet. "And the capsule jackets need to be 5 millimeters apart. People don't buy chaos." "Yes, Ms. Reed," Claire said. She reached for a microfiber cloth and, out of habit, smiled at her own reflection. Her grandmother used to say, "If you smile at a mirror, it might just smile back." It was silly, but in this store of angles and rules, the memory steadied her. When Michael entered, the silver door chime rang out softly. Valerie glanced in passing. Simple clothes, scuffed backpack, unbranded shoes. She lowered her gaze to the tablet again. He was not, she judged, the sort of client who merited attention. Claire, however, looked up and let her smile reach her eyes. That simple, human smile cracked the cool surface of the morning. "Good morning, sir. May I help you?" Claire said gently. "Thank you." "I'm just looking," Michael said, calm, almost grateful. Michael stopped in front of a brown leather jacket, hand-finished, the kind of leather that doesn't shout but speaks softly in a language of grain and weight. He touched it with respect, the way one touches a work of art, and for a while said nothing, tracing the stitches with his finger. "It's fine work," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Claire stepped closer and, as people do when speaking of what they love, let warmth rise into her voice. "It's made in a small Soho atelier," she said. "A family operation. It takes almost a week to stitch one. The leather's hand-dyed. The cut follows the natural line of the shoulders. It's built to last." She did not rush her words. She let each detail land like a promise. From a distance, Valerie watched, then intervened, her voice sugared and sharp as a blade. "Sir, perhaps you'd like to see our outlet line," Valerie said. "It's more accessible." She pressed the last word as if it were an act of mercy. Michael's smile held, but a flicker of sadness moved through his eyes. "I only wanted to look at the quality," he said softly. "You see it up close, not on a price tag." He spoke with the calm of someone who does not wish to hurt, but is used to being hurt by appearances. Valerie's attention pivoted. Two influencers floated in, trailing a cloud of perfume and phone cameras. "Ladies, welcome," Valerie said, voice turning warm and glossy. "You look incredible. Our new capsule will blow up your reels. It's perfect for your stories." Claire stayed with Michael, feeling a small embarrassment that was not his to carry. She handed him a small bottle of water with the naturalness of someone who simply does the right thing. "Here you go, sir. It's free, even on Fifth Avenue," she said, and smiled. Michael chuckled quietly, and that small sound was the first time anyone truly laughed in the boutique that morning. He lifted the jacket again, measuring its weight. "Could I try this?" Michael asked, his gaze steady but gentle. "I'm sorry, the fitting rooms are all occupied," Valerie said after a theatrical pause. Behind her, 3 doors stood visibly open, their curtains breathing in the air conditioning. Claire didn't flinch. Justice can be a small gesture. "Number 3 is free." "Right this way, sir," she said, drawing back the curtain with careful hands. Inside the fitting room, a soft light made the leather glow. Michael slipped off his jacket and saw the faint outline of a scar. Near his collarbone, an old memory from lifting crates in his father's shop. He pulled on the Luna House jacket. It settled over him as if it had been waiting. He rolled his shoulders, and the scene spoke a quiet, satisfying language of give and strength. From his backpack, he took a folded scrap of paper with a handwritten line. "Every guest is an honored guest." It had been his father's motto. Tony Ferris, a Queen's tailor who pricked his fingers more times than anyone could count and called each drop of blood tuition. Michael read the line in silence and tucked the paper back, the way a person returns a ring to its box. In that moment, he could hear the old shop's radio, the Mets game he'd grown up with, and his father saying, "Kid, people remember how you looked at them more than what you sold them," Tony used to say. "That's the real stitch. Don't skip it." Michael stepped out. Silence rippled across the boutique. Not because anyone recognized him, but because suddenly he looked like someone, or rather, like himself, as he was before numbers and headlines. The jacket did not make him rich. It restored the posture of a man who had nothing to prove. "It does look good on you," Valerie said at last, her smile still not reaching her eyes. "But upkeep runs about a month's salary." "I'll take it," Michael said without hesitation. "And the Oxfords and the weekender bag in the window." A disbelieving smile flickered across Valerie's face. "For purchases at this level, we'll need a pre-authorization," she said, one brow lifting like a gate that wouldn't open. "That's not necessary," Claire whispered, almost embarrassed by the hardness of the other woman. "Company policy allows payment after alterations." "My policy allows common sense," Valerie said crisply. dropping the sentence like a gavel. But it was already too late. Michael's eyes had seen everything: the speed of judgment, the choreography of dismissal, and the quiet countermelody of kindness. A seamstress in her 60s, Mrs. Alvarez, appeared from the back with a pincushion tied to her wrist. "Alterations on the shoulder?" she asked in a voice truthful as chalk. She didn't look at the shoes or the backpack. She looked at the man. "Maybe a touch at the sleeve," Michael said. "Just enough to meet the wrist. We'll make it right, Mrs. Alvarez said, and she said it like a vow. Near the door, a security guard nodded to a delivery man who wheeled in a stack of garment boxes. Life went on, indifferent and buzzing, but a line had been drawn that morning in a place no receipt could reach. The influencers posed by the window, practicing a laugh that showed teeth but not joy. "Tag us," Valerie called, all gloss again. "Use hashtag LunaHouseNYC," she said, already scrolling the brand's feed to see if the post appeared. She wanted lightning in a bottle, but she'd settled for glare in a glass. Claire guided Michael to a quiet corner mirror. "How does it feel in the back?" she asked. "You should be able to breathe, lift, hail a cab, hug someone, and not feel it ride up." She smiled, and then, catching herself, she said, "Sorry, that's my mental checklist." "It's a good checklist," Michael said. He lifted both arms. The jacket moved with him like a promise kept. At the register, George Ventura, the store manager, was initialing invoices when a courier dropped a sealed envelope embossed with the Luna House crest. George slid it open with a practiced motion. He read. He went still. "Anonymous inspection. The CEO will visit boutiques without notice. Findings will inform promotions and dismissals." George looked up. His eyes landed on the man in the leather jacket, on Claire's attentive posture, on Valerie's orbit around the bright, easy customers. His throat tightened. The store clock ticked louder. "Everything okay?" Claire asked, noticing the color drain from George's face. "Fine," George said, but the word came out thin. "Just." Corporate timing. Michael returned to the counter, jacket still on, sleeves marked in chalk. He laid the weekender bag beside it and rested his hand on the leather as if on a living thing. He watched Valerie without malice. He watched Claire with gratitude he kept behind his teeth. "Would you like us to hold anything until the alterations are finished?" Claire asked. "I'll take the shoes now," Michael said. "They'll remind me to stand correctly." Valerie folded her arms. "Pre-authorization?" she said again, as if repeating it could make it policy. "Let's ring him up after tailoring," George said, stepping forward with a voice that tried to sound casual and only sounded careful. "We can do that," he said, glancing at the envelope on his desk as though it might catch fire. Michael nodded once, as if a private decision had found its moment. "Thank you," he said to Claire. Then he turned, slowly, to include the room, the rails, the mirrors, the people who believed they knew what mattered. "Thank you," he said again, and the second time was different. It was the kind of thank you a person gives before telling the truth. A city bus sighed at the curb outside. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice. In the seamstress's corner, Mrs. Alvarez set her pincushion down as if sensing a weather change inside the store. Michael unzipped his backpack and took out a leather folio stamped with Luna House's crest. He didn't rush. He placed it on the counter, opened it, and let the documents breathe signatures, seals, authorizations, the quiet grammar of authority. He looked at Valerie, then at Claire, then at George. "My name is Michael Ferris," he said steadily, "and I'm the chief executive officer of Luna House." Silence held. One of the influence's flutes, slipped and chimed against the marble like a small, embarrassed bell. Valerie's face drained to the color of plaster. Her gaze, for the first time, lost the scaffolding of pride. "Sir, I didn't know," Valerie said, voice skittering. "Exactly," Michael said, without raising his voice. "You weren't meant to know. You were meant to treat people with respect." He turned to Claire. "You offered me water, a fitting room, and courtesy. That was enough," he said. "It was just my job," Claire said, lowering her eyes, color rising to her cheeks. "No," Michael said, quiet and clear. "It was the difference between working and having a soul." The clock over the register ticked once more, loud as a gavel. For a few seconds, time in the boutique stood completely still. The city outside went on, horns blaring, taxis sliding through wet streets, the faint hum of a saxophone from a corner busker. But inside, everything was frozen under the weight of recognition. Valerie's lips parted, but no sound came. She blinked as though the world around her had gone out of focus. Her tablet, still open on the counter, reflected Michael's face, calm, composed, unshaken. "Sir, she began, her voice breaking before she could gather it. Michael didn't move. "You've worked here long, haven't you, Miss Reed?" he asked, gently, as if giving her a chance to find her footing. 8 years, she said, barely audible. 8 years, Mr. Ferris. I started as a sales associate, moved up, worked every holiday, every late shift. He nodded once. Then you know better than anyone that every person who walks through that door is a story, not a category, not a transaction. Valerie's throat tightened. "You're right," she whispered, her fingers curling around the edge of the counter. "But you have to understand, this is Fifth Avenue. We get people in here every day trying to look rich, wasting our time. I was just protecting the brand," Michael said, finishing her sentence. His tone wasn't angry, it was weary. "I built this brand to protect people, not humiliate them." Somewhere along the way, that message got lost. Behind her, Claire stood silently, eyes wide. She wanted to speak, to defend Valerie somehow, to explain that this job made people hard, that kindness here came with a cost. But she stayed still, knowing this wasn't her moment to mend, only to witness. Mrs. Alvarez, the seamstress, muttered under her breath, "Dios mío," then folded her hands as if in prayer. Michael exhaled slowly. "You're a good manager, Miss Reed. The numbers tell me that. But today I learned something more important than sales. I learned that some of us are treating pride like it's part of the uniform." Valerie's eyes shimmered. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to offend you." "If I had known," Michael cut her off softly. "That's the problem. You shouldn't need to know who someone is to treat them decently." The silence that followed was almost kind. It gave everyone space to breathe, to take in what had just happened. From the back, George Ventura stepped forward, clutching the letter that had summoned this entire reckoning. "Sir," he said carefully, "I take full responsibility. The tone of the staff, the training, those fall under me." Michael turned toward him. "Responsibility isn't blame, George," he said, his voice low but steady. "It's opportunity. Let's use this one." He looked at Claire again, at her hands, still lightly trembling at her sides. "You treated me as if I mattered," he said, and the corners of his mouth softened. "That's the heart of this company. That's what my father taught me when he was still fixing seams in a back room in Queens." Claire swallowed hard. "He must have been a good man," she said quietly. "The best," Michael said, his eyes far away now, caught between the past and the smell of rain outside. He used to work 16 hours a day. Never sold anything he wouldn't wear himself. Once, a banker came into his shop, treated him like dirt. My dad still stitched the man's suit perfectly and slipped a note in the inside pocket. It said, "Dignity looks good on everyone." The room breathed that in. Even Valerie's shoulders softened, her chin dipping slightly toward her chest. Michael looked around at every gleaming mannequin, every mirror that had reflected only perfection for too long. "That note," he said, "was worth more than every ad campaign I've ever signed off on." He turned back to Valerie. "I'm not firing you for being strict. I'm letting you go because you forgot how to see people. That's something no amount of training can teach." Valerie's lip quivered. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll remember," Michael said gently. "I will," she whispered, her voice breaking like glass. "I swear I will." He nodded. "You'll receive full severance and a paid transition program. Take that time to find what you lost here. Maybe it wasn't just kindness. Maybe it was joy." Valerie closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down and fell onto the counter. Claire, moved by instinct, stepped forward and touched her arm. "It's not the end," Claire said softly. "It's just the way life teaches." Valerie opened her eyes and met hers. "Thank you," she said, barely audible. When she left a few minutes later, carrying a small box filled with personal items, perfume, a framed photo of her dog, a notebook of client notes, the store was utterly quiet. The door chimed once as she stepped into the rain. Michael stood still, looking after her. The city lights spilled across the glass, washing his reflection into 100 versions of himself. Then he turned back to Claire. "Ms. Morris," he said, "starting tomorrow, you're the new store manager." Her eyes widened. "Me?" she said, blinking. "But, I've only been here 2 years." "There are people with seniority. Maybe," Michael said, "but none with your heart. And right now, this place needs heart more than hierarchy." "I don't know what to say," Claire said, her voice breaking into a laugh of disbelief. "Say you'll help me fix what's broken," he said. She nodded, her throat tight. "Then yes," she said softly. "I will." From behind the counter, Mrs. Alvarez clapped her hands once. "Good," she said. "Maybe now we sew with feeling again." Even George smiled, relief softening the lines around his mouth. "Congratulations, Claire," he said, shaking her hand. "You've earned it." Michael took one last look around before stepping toward the door. "You'll see me again," he said. "Not as your boss, as your customer." Then he paused, hand on the door. "And remember, every guest is an honored guest." The words lingered in the air long after he left. Outside, the rain had stopped for real this time. The late afternoon light fell gold between buildings, catching the taxi roofs and the puddles that hadn't yet drained. Michael walked without destination, letting the city pull him wherever it wanted. His shoes slapped softly against the wet pavement, but inside he felt something else, an ache that wasn't quite anger, not quite sadness. He ducked into a coffee shop on Madison. The barista, a kid with blue hair and a nose ring, didn't recognize him either, and that was exactly what he needed. "What can I get you, man?" the kid asked. "Just a black coffee," Michael said. "Name for the cup." "Mike," he said, without thinking. He sat by the window, watching Fifth Avenue pulse with life, the constant motion of ambition and exhaustion. He wondered how many people out there had been dismissed the way Valerie had dismissed him. How many moments of grace had died under the weight of assumption? He remembered his father again, Tony Ferris, bent over a sewing machine, humming Sinatra as he worked. "You gotta make room for the good ones, Mikey," he'd say, even in business. Michael's phone buzzed. A text from Julia, his sister. "Mom's doctor called. Check in tomorrow. Don't forget." He smiled faintly. Yeah, I won't," he murmured to himself. Family, the only real brand that mattered. He stayed in that cafe for almost an hour, thinking. Watching people. The doorman helping an elderly woman into a cab. A man holding an umbrella for a stranger at the crosswalk. Little flashes of grace. He took out his notebook and wrote down one sentence. "Kindness doesn't dilute power. It defines it." He underlined it twice. That would be the next company memo, not about margins, not about marketing, but about values. When the evening shadows stretched across the city, he rose, tossed his empty cup, and started walking north. Meanwhile, back at Luna House, Claire stood at the counter long after closing time. The lights had dimmed, and the store had taken on a strange silence, the kind that feels both peaceful and heavy. She ran her hand along the display of handbags, then across the smooth marble counter where the day had turned inside out. Mrs. Alvarez had gone home hours ago. George had left her the keys. "Lock up when you're ready," he'd said. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, tired, yes, but changed somehow. She thought of Michael's words, of how easily he could have humiliated Valerie in return, but hadn't. He'd corrected her with compassion, not cruelty. And that, she realized, was its own kind of power. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mother popped up. "Dinner leftovers in the fridge. Don't stay too late, honey." Claire smiled. Her mother worked as a nurse in Staten Island. They lived together in a modest apartment, one that always smelled faintly of lavender and soup. It wasn't much, but it was home. She texted back, "On my way soon, just closing up." She walked to the front window and looked out. Across the street, the city shimmered, people rushing under umbrellas, headlights painting streaks of gold on the asphalt. She thought of Michael out there somewhere, walking alone, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she whispered to the empty store, "I hope he's okay." She turned off the lights, locked the doors, and stepped into the cool night. The rain had started again, light, rhythmic, gentle. She opened her small black umbrella and began her walk toward the subway. Behind her, the boutique's dark windows reflected her silhouette, small but steady. Michael didn't go straight home. He lived uptown in a penthouse with glass walls and art that decorators had chosen. Tonight, it felt too empty to return to. He found himself walking west toward the river. At a food cart by Bryant Park, he stopped for a hot dog. The vendor, an older man with a thick accent, looked at him and said, "You look like you had a long day, friend." "You could say that," Michael said, smiling faintly. The man shrugged. "Every day's long if you forget to smile. Mustard." "Yeah," Michael said. "Mustard's good." They ate in silence under the canopy of the cart. The rain made a soft percussion on the metal roof. For the first time in years, Michael felt ordinary. And it felt good. He thought again about the day, about Valerie's eyes when she realized the truth, about Claire's steady kindness, about the quiet dignity of Mrs. Alvarez. Maybe his father was right. People remember how you looked at them, not what you sold them. When he finally reached home, the doorman greeted him with a polite nod. "Evening, Mr. Ferris." "Evening, Ray," Michael said. "Rough day, sir?" Michael paused. "Eye-opening," he said simply. Upstairs, he dropped his backpack on the couch and stood by the window. The city was still awake, of course. It was. It always was. Somewhere out there, someone was being ignored. And someone else was offering water in a place where no one expected kindness. He looked down at the jacket, still folded neatly in its box on the table. Then, without really planning to, he picked up the phone and called Human Resources. "Hi, this is Ferris," he said when a voice answered. "Tomorrow morning, I want every boutique manager in New York in for a meeting. We're going to talk about something we've all forgotten." "What topic, sir?" the assistant asked. "Dignity," he said, and hung up. He poured himself a glass of water, took a slow sip, and smiled. Outside, a taxi honked twice. Somewhere, faintly, a saxophone started up again. And Michael thought maybe this city still had a soul after all. The next morning, Manhattan wore a different kind of gray, the kind that promised renewal instead of rain. The city was yawning awake, delivery trucks rolling up curbs, bakers setting trays of croissants behind fogged windows, commuters clutching coffee cups like promises. Michael Ferris stood at the wide window of Luna House headquarters in Midtown, 30 floors above the street. From up here, New York looked like a circuit board, glowing, complex, alive. He could see Fifth Avenue like a vein pulsing through glass and steel. It looked perfect from this height, but he knew better. He'd been that man down below, invisible in a store that bore his name, and now he couldn't unsee it. His assistant, Lydia Parks, knocked gently and peeked in. "Sir, the managers are gathering in the main conference room," she said. "Would you like coffee before we start?" "No, thank you," Michael said, buttoning his jacket. "I'll take honesty instead." Lydia smiled faintly. She'd worked for him long enough to recognize when he was about to cause a quiet revolution. He walked down the hall, his reflection trailing him in the glass walls. Every employee he passed smiled, said good morning, some out of respect, some out of fear. Michael wondered which was which. Inside the conference room, nearly 20 managers sat around a long mahogany table, phones face down, eyes cautious. Charts and numbers filled the screen at the far end. "Good morning," Michael said, his voice calm but clear. "Let's skip the metrics today. We'll talk about something that doesn't fit in a spreadsheet." He paused, letting their attention settle. "Yesterday, I visited one of our boutiques on Fifth Avenue. I didn't arrive as myself. I arrived as any man might, unnoticed, unremarkable. I wanted to see who we were when no one was watching." A murmur ran through the room. Someone shifted in their seat. Michael continued, "I was ignored by one of our senior staff, offered kindness by another, and reminded by both that the soul of this company has been living in the wrong department. We've built a brand on elegance, but we've forgotten grace." He let that hang for a moment. "You know what the difference is?" he asked. "Elegance is how we dress the outside. Grace is how we treat the inside." At the far end of the table, a young manager named Evelyn spoke up hesitantly. "Was it true, sir, about the dismissal?" "Yes," Michael said. "Valerie Reed was released yesterday. She's capable, and I wish her well. But I will not lead a company that measures worth by appearance." Silence again, not of fear, but of reflection. "From today," he continued, "every store in this company will begin what I'm calling the Dignity Project." Lydia, taking notes near the door, looked up. The room leaned forward slightly. "Every associate, manager, tailor, and delivery driver will receive training, not in sales, but in empathy. We will partner with community colleges, hire interns from local neighborhoods, offer free alterations to clients who can't afford them. And yes, we'll probably lose some money in the short term. But we'll gain something I can't put on a balance sheet. Trust." He turned off the screen, the numbers vanishing into darkness. Because if we can't recognize dignity when it walks through our doors, we don't deserve to be in business. No one spoke. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Then George Ventura, the store manager from Fifth Avenue, slowly rose to his feet. "Mr. Ferris," he said, voice steady. "I was there yesterday. I saw what happened. And I'll be honest, I've spent half my career teaching people how to upsell. Maybe it's time we learn how to see." A few others nodded. Michael smiled faintly. "That's the best thing I've heard all week." The meeting ended without applause. But when he stepped out into the hallway, Lydia caught his eye. "Sir," she said, "for what it's worth, that was the first time I've seen a room full of managers actually listen." He smiled. "Then we're off to a good start." Across the city, Claire Morris was unlocking the boutique for her first morning as manager. Her hands shook slightly as she turned the key, the metal cold against her skin. Inside, the familiar scent of leather and cedar greeted her like a memory she wasn't sure she deserved. She took a deep breath. "Okay," she whispered to herself. "You can do this." Mrs. Alvarez appeared from the back room with a measuring tape draped around her neck. "Good morning, Jeffa," she said, grinning. Claire laughed. "Don't start with that." "I'm still getting used to hearing it." "Then practice, Mrs. Alvarez said, handing her a cup of coffee from the corner deli. "The store listens when the person in charge believes in herself." Claire smiled and sipped. "Thank you, Rosa, for everything." "You thank too much," Mrs. Alvarez said. "It's time people thank you." A delivery arrived, boxes stacked high with the new spring collection. Claire rolled up her sleeves, helped the delivery boy unload, signed the form herself. Valerie would have hated that. Managers didn't touch boxes. But Claire didn't care. She was building something different now. As she unpacked, she found a note taped inside one of the cartons. It was written in Michael's handwriting. "To the team at Fifth Avenue, every guest is an honored guest. Let's make sure they feel that way. M.F." She held the paper in her hands for a moment, her heart tightening. The words were simple, but they pulsed with meaning. Mrs. Alvarez peeked over her shoulder. "He wrote that?" she asked. "Yes," Claire said softly. "I think he really meant it." By noon, the store was open. Customers came and went. A young woman looking for a graduation dress, a father buying a scarf for his daughter's birthday, a retired teacher who just wanted to browse something beautiful, just to feel it, and this time, every one of them was greeted with warmth. Claire made sure of it. She spoke to the teacher about her favorite authors, helped the student take photos to send to her mother, and even convinced the father to try on a jacket, just because he deserved to feel sharp. Too, for the first time, the boutique didn't feel like a cathedral. It felt like a place where people belonged. That evening, as Claire was locking up, she noticed a reflection in the window, a man standing across the street, watching the store. The sunset burned behind him, painting the pavement gold. It was Michael. He didn't wave, didn't step closer, just offered a small nod, a gesture that said, "You're doing fine." Claire smiled and returned the nod. When she looked back up, he was gone, swallowed by the crowd. The Dignity Project spread faster than anyone expected. Corporate headlines called it Luna House's Quiet Revolution. Employees shared stories online. The associate who helped a homeless veteran try on a coat. The tailor who offered free repair work for a single mom's interview outfit. The store in Chicago that donated unsold shoes to high school kids before prom. Michael watched it all unfold from his office and sometimes from the sidewalk. He'd visit stores unannounced, not to test but to learn. At each one, he found signs of the changed thank you notes taped to counters, smiles that weren't rehearsed. But he couldn't shake one thought. It had started because of one woman's kindness. He thought of Claire, often her calm voice, her quiet confidence, the way she'd said it's not the end. It's just the way life teaches. One Friday evening, he finally gave in to the impulse. He took the subway, something he hadn't done in years, and got off near the boutique. The city was buzzing with weekend life. Couples holding hands, food carts steaming, music spilling from open bars. Through the window, he saw Claire rearranging a display. She was laughing with Mrs. Alvarez about something he couldn't hear. Her sleeves were rolled up, and her hair had come loose from its clip. She looked alive in a way no advertisement could ever capture. He stepped inside quietly. The bell chimed and she looked up, startled, then smiled. "Mr. Ferris," she said, "you're here." "I told you I'd be back as a customer," he said, returning her smile. "What are you shopping for tonight?" she asked. "Perspective," he said, "and maybe a new pair of gloves." She laughed. "Those we can manage." Perspective's complimentary. They talked for almost half an hour. About work, yes, but also about everything else. New York's unpredictable kindness, their favorite quiet corners of the city, the memory of her father fixing radios in their Staten Island kitchen. When Mrs. Alvarez finally left for the night, Claire began to close up. Michael lingered by the door. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. When you gave me that bottle of water that day." "Why?" She tilted her head. "Because you looked like you needed it." He smiled faintly. "No one had done something that simple for me in a long time." She shrugged, a little embarrassed. "Then I'm glad I did." He hesitated, then said softly, "Would you let me take you to dinner? Nothing fancy, just someplace where the napkins aren't starched." She blinked, caught between surprise and amusement. "If you promise not to show up undercover." "I promise," he said, hand over his heart. They met that night at a small Italian restaurant in the village. The kind with brick walls, flickering candles, and an old man playing violin in the corner. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. The city, childhood dreams, how both of them secretly hated the sound of high heels on marble floors. By the time they stepped outside, the air had turned crisp. They walked to the subway together, talking as if they'd been doing it forever. At the entrance, she said, "You know, I still can't believe I talked back to Valerie that day." "I can," Michael said, "because kindness is courage in disguise." She smiled. "That's a good line. You should put it on a t-shirt," he laughed. "Maybe I'll just remember who taught it to me." They said goodnight there under the glow of the streetlight. He didn't ask for her number. He already had it in the company directory, but he didn't need to. Some things don't have to be planned. They just continue. Over the next few months, their paths crossed often. She attended leadership meetings at headquarters, and he started, accidentally, stopping by the store on Saturday mornings. Sometimes he'd bring coffee. Sometimes just an excuse to ask, "How's morale?" And slowly, something unspoken began to weave between them. Not a fairy tale, but something gentler, steadier, the kind of connection that grows from mutual respect and shared purpose. One afternoon, while reviewing new designs, Michael asked Claire to join the creative team for feedback. "You have an eye for what feels real," he said. "Me? I sell clothes. I don't design them," she said. "That's exactly why I want your opinion," he said. "You see people, not mannequins." They spent hours together that day, sketching, debating fabrics. laughing over how impractical most runway looks were for actual life. At one point, he caught himself watching her, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the quiet confidence that radiated from her without her even knowing it. He looked away quickly, reminded that he was her boss. But something inside him, something that had been asleep for years, stirred awake. That night, as he rode the elevator back to his apartment, he realized he hadn't thought about profits once all day. Only people, only her. Spring came back to New York the way forgiveness comes, slowly, shyly, almost unwilling at first. The trees in Bryant Park were budding pale green. The air smelled of roasted chestnuts instead of exhaust, and the city seemed to walk with a lighter step. Inside Luna House headquarters, a quiet storm was brewing. The Dignity Project had caught national attention. Articles ran in Forbes, and the New Yorker one headline read, "The Luxury of Kindness. How one CEO changed the conversation." Michael didn't want fame. He wanted proof that the experiment worked. Every month he visited a different store, unannounced, sometimes with a baseball cap pulled low, sometimes openly. Each time he saw the difference: greetings that were sincere, laughter that wasn't staged, mirrors that reflected comfort rather than comparison. Yet something else was growing too, a feeling that had nothing to do with business metrics. It was the way Claire's name felt when he said it, the way she looked at every customer, as if they were a story waiting to be heard. The day began with a meeting but ended with a storm. Sheets of rain blurred Fifth Avenue into watercolor. Michael, trapped in his office, stared at the phone for a long time before finally dialing the boutique. "Luna House, this is Claire," she said, her voice like sunlight in a gray room. "Hey," he said, trying to sound casual. "Do you still like coffee after 6 p.m? "Only if it comes with an umbrella," she said, laughing. "Then I'll bring both." An hour later, they sat in the corner of a small cafe near the Flatiron, steam rising from their cups, rain streaming down the windows in silver threads. "I used to hate this city," Claire said, stirring her coffee. "Too fast, too loud, too proud. But lately, I don't know. It feels softer." "It's not the city that changed," Michael said. "It's the way you see it." She looked at him, a faint question in her eyes. "And what about you? Do you see it differently now?" He smiled, the kind that came from deep places. "I used to think success meant being seen. Now I think it means seeing others." For a while, they just listened to the rain. Outside, taxis hissed past. Inside, the world felt suspended, as if everything that mattered had fit into that small table between two cups. The following month brought Luna House's annual investor gala, a glittering night at the Met Atrium. Cameras, champagne, and everything Michael had grown weary of. Still, it mattered for the company, so he went. Claire was invited too. As the new Fifth Avenue manager, her team had just broken a sales record without a single upselling complaint. When she arrived, wearing a simple navy dress and a quiet confidence, Michael forgot for a second that he was supposed to give a speech. The crowd melted, the music softened. "Ms. Morris," he said, meeting her halfway across the marble floor. "Mr. Ferris," she said, smiling. "You clean up well." "I try," he said, laughing. "Ready to see how the 1% celebrates empathy?" She grinned. "I'll believe it when I see it." Halfway through the night, a group of investors cornered Michael near the bar. One of them, sleek and cynical, said, "This Dignity Project is charming, Ferris, but is it profitable? You can't build margins on manners." Michael caught Claire's gaze from across the room, drew courage from it, and answered calmly, "No, But you can build loyalty, and loyalty lasts longer than any margin. The investor laughed politely, but said nothing more. When Michael turned back, Claire was smiling, not because he'd impressed anyone, but because he'd chosen the harder truth. Later, as the party thinned, they slipped outside for air. Central Park shimmered with wet lamplight. "You handled that beautifully," Claire said. "I just told the truth," he said. "Something I learned from someone on my sales floor." She looked up at him, eyes reflecting the city lights. "You mean me?" "I mean you," he said, quietly. A long pause stretched between them, comfortable, necessary. The kind of pause where the next step could change everything. By June, the Dignity Project had become company culture, not campaign. Stores donated portions of proceeds to local shelters. Employees volunteered in textile workshops for underprivileged youth. Claire's boutique became the model others tried to copy. Though she never acted like she led a movement, she still cleaned display glass herself, still kept a stash of granola bars for couriers who looked tired. Michael visited more often, no longer pretending he had a reason. Sometimes he brought lunch for the staff. Sometimes he and Claire shared takeout boxes behind the counter. He learned she loved sketching designs, but had never shown anyone. She learned he loved jazz but couldn't play a single instrument. One afternoon, a tourist spilled an entire latte over a rack of cream-colored blouses. Claire smiled, grabbed towels, calmed the panicked woman. When the customer left, apologizing over and over, Michael said, "You didn't even flinch." "She was embarrassed enough," Claire said. "No need for two of us to suffer." He looked at her for a long time, then said, almost to himself, "You remind me what leadership's supposed to look like." She blushed, looked away. "Careful, or you'll make me think I belong here." "You do," he said, certain now. Leaves burned gold along Park Avenue when the board approved a new internal motto, "Every guest is an honored guest." It was printed on cards, engraved on mirrors, stitched inside the linings of Luna housecoats. And under the line, in small cursive letters, it said, "In memory of Tony Ferris." When Michael saw the prototype, he felt a lump rise in his throat. He called Claire. "I need to show you something," he said. They met that evening on the boutique's mezzanine. He handed her one of the new coats. She turned the lapel and saw the inscription. She touched the words gently. "Your father?" He nodded. "He would have liked you. I think I would have liked him too." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the city below them. Then she said softly, "You know, Michael, you've changed this company." He looked at her, shaking his head. "No, you did." I just finally listened. And in that simple truth, the distance between them dissolved. Snow dusted the city like powdered sugar. The boutique windows glowed with soft light, sweaters folded like clouds, scarves arranged in careful spirals. On Christmas Eve, Claire worked the early shift. By noon, customers were gone, replaced by quiet. The door opened. Michael stepped in, holding 2 coffees. "Thought you could use this," he said. She smiled. "You remembered how I take it." "I remember everything about that day," he said. They sat on the fitting room bench, sipping coffee while flakes drifted outside. "I keep thinking," Claire said, "if you hadn't come in that morning pretending to be someone else, none of this would have happened." He laughed softly. "Sometimes we have to lose our title to find our purpose." She tilted her head. "And what's your purpose now?" He met her gaze. "Maybe it's this," he said, "right here." The air between them warmed despite the cold. He reached out, hesitated, then brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. She didn't pull away. "Michael," she whispered, If anyone walks in right now, they'll see two people who finally got it right, he said. Outside, a bell from St. Patrick's chimed the hour. The city slowed for just a heartbeat. He leaned forward, kissed her softly, honestly, without promise or performance, only presence. It wasn't the kind of kiss that ends a story. It was the kind that begins a life. Spring again. The Luna House flagship thrived, not because of profits alone, but because people came for something more than clothes. They came to be seen. On any given day, you could find Claire at the counter, laughing with the seamstress, helping a teenager choose her first suit, greeting an old man who just needed conversation. Michael still traveled, but always found his way back to that store. Sometimes they worked side by side. Sometimes they simply shared silence, the kind that feels like home. One evening, as they closed the doors, he handed her a small box. Inside was a key. "To the new community atelier in Queens," he said. "We're opening it next month. A place where kids can learn tailoring, design, business, the works. I want you to run it with me." She looked up, eyes shining. "You mean it?" "I've never meant anything more." She threw her arms around him, laughing through tears. "Then let's make it happen," she said. He held her for a moment, breathing in the faint scent of leather and rain that always seemed to follow her. "I think my father would be proud," he whispered. "He is," she said. "And so is mine." Outside, the city pulsed with light, the endless rhythm of lives colliding and continuing. For once, New York didn't feel like glass. It felt like flesh alive, warm, fallible, kind. True elegance is not measured by what we wear, but by how we look at those who have less. Power can buy almost everything except nobility of spirit. And sometimes a store clerk and a man with a backpack remind us that kindness is the rarest luxury of all. When we choose it, day after day, it becomes the truest name for love.